Hello and welcome to another episode of The Modern Nerd. I am Sir Slice 13.
I'm sad merchandise.
I'm pleasantly neutral GJC.
And we are, as always, massive nerds. So, last episode we talked about Prey and She-Hulk. Go watch those. And now we're going to talk about one of the most controversial yet still popular things to have ever happened to television. This is now House of the Dragon, which I'm going to continuously call Game of Thrones, not by choice because it just flows better than House of the Dragon. So if I say that, I apologize.
Well,
but
it's
I'm
like
talking
calling
about
Star Wars
House
Star
of the
Wars.
Dragon.
It's like calling Star Wars Star Wars.
So, we have the first episode of the House of the Dragon. So spoilers, hardcore spoilers, and possible triggers for anybody.
Yeah.
Big time triggers.
Yeah.
In this episode.
Should put that like at the beginning.
Trigger warning.
Trigger warning in general.
That's why I'm saying this now.
In the video, like have an actual.
Is that warning just for me, or is it just?
No, it's for everyone.
No.
You switch you're
Trigger
not
warning
alone.
Means Dan's gonna get triggered. No,
this is a real epidemic that people have.
Yeah.
You know, you're not
There's
alone. You are
upcoming
one of
forecast,
thousands, millions.
100% chance of trigger for me. So there we go.
I am specifically talking about trigger warnings for content for anybody that's going to watch. So before we get into all these trigger warnings, I want to say thank everybody for watching. I want to thank you guys for being here with me and being my co-hosts in this show.
So nice.
I believe it's this way and this way. I don't know. Let's see. Yep. And thank you everyone else for being here and joining us live and or watching us on our Sunday casts or whatever day I end up posting all of these, because we're doing content out the ass these days, which I am so enjoying. If you are enjoying it as much as we enjoy doing it, please make sure to like and subscribe and leave some comments. Talk to us. We want to hear from you. I try and be active in all the comments. A shout out to Easy Rider, who comments on most of my YouTube videos. I'll say this: speedy recovery to you, sir. He was in a biking accident, so I hope he recovers soon. He's a friend of mine. Other than that, let's jump into House of the Dragon. Into Matt Smith with white hair. I look, I'm on the fence. I'm not as damn it, it's gonna happen. I told Dan it wasn't gonna happen. We weren't gonna talk about it. I'm not as scorned about Game of Thrones as the rest of the world.
Me either, to be honest.
I'm mad about it. Don't get me wrong. I think it was, but for a whole different reason. But I'm also like, fuck it. Like, at this point, it was 4 years ago.
Yeah,
3 years ago.
It is impossible to not talk about Game of Thrones and talk about this show.
So
this show would not exist
saying,
without it, and that's okay.
Sure. But I'm just saying, I'm going into this one not as scorned as all of the world. But as a pilot, if you will, or a first episode for something, it was fine. You know, I enjoyed it as much as I enjoy characters. So you know, I like the girl who plays Rhaenyra. I can never get half of these characters' names. Rhaenyra. I liked her. I think she has some potential for a really good character, and I'm really interested to see where her character goes. Matt Smith, again, I'm very intrigued as to where this character goes, because he was very much the sore thumb sticking out of the rest of the cast. Like, you look at which I was talking about earlier with my wife, was you look at venereal disease. What's his name? Varys.
Lord Varys.
The guy, the king, the current king in this show, Viserys.
Same name as Daenerys' brother, Viserys.
All right. Everybody has, like, a grittier, like, they just, the tone of all the male voices is down here somewhere, and then Matt Smith comes in and has like his voice is so much higher, which in the beginning for me at first I was like, what is this? Like, is this? But I think I can kind of understand what they're doing. Is like, he's not like all the rest of the Targaryens, and it's going to kind of hint towards, hopefully he's not, obviously he's not the Mad King, but like what starts to unravel into, like Targaryen curse and the craziness and like the violence and everything of that house. So I'm intrigued to see where some of these characters go and what happens with it. I mean, this is 172 years prior to the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. So obviously we're not going to cover 172 years in one season, or I don't know how many seasons it's getting. We'll see how it does, but we're getting 10 episodes. So we've kind of started to see that, like, the building grounds of who's going to be contending for the throne. You've got the queen who never was. I don't even remember her last name.
Valerian.
And then you've got obviously Matt Smith's character, and then they've named the heir as, what's her name, Rhaenyra. So it's you kind of are setting up the landscape, I think, a little bit with that. Dan had a good point when you were talking about how it was a setup show, which is interesting. That's the choice they made for a first episode.
Okay, so the
yeah.
only reason I am watching this is because of my lovely girlfriend Christina. Hi, Christina.
Thank you, Christina, for making him watch this.
Yeah. So
he's obviously not thankful.
Shut up, George. Unlike these two gentlemen, I am still very salty about how things ended, and am totally going into this show with my arms crossed because Game of Thrones was far and away my favorite show until it all went to shit. I mean, honestly, it was like, there was a few steps here with like Avatar, and Game of Thrones is up here. Like we all rewatched every season, everything leading up into like the new season, going into each new season. That's how good the show was, and how much there was to unpack. Well, me and George did,
for the first season with you.
We were the only ones.
I can't count how many times I've rewatched Game of Thrones.
I know, and we weren't the only ones that did that. There are multiple friends of mine that did that as well, and so did many other people. So I did not like the ending. I actually think some of the choices were good. It's just we arrived there too quickly. Things felt too rushed. Didn't feel organic. I was disappointed, to put it lightly. And I still haven't gotten that taste out of my mouth. So to go into this show, to have the first episode be what is clearly a setup episode, is very cocky and bold of them. You do not have the premiere episode of a show be a setup episode. You have the first episode there to grab you. Now, you could say it was because they're going off the previous, wave of Game of Thrones, and so maybe they don't need to, or they get right into it. And I suppose that's okay. That being said, I wasn't grabbed. I think there was some good character work here. I think there were some good performances, but otherwise it felt very run of the mill. Nothing stuck out to me as this didn't feel special to me. This felt kind of like, okay. So I obviously have some previous opinions to get over, and I understand that, and I recognize that. That being said, I don't think there was a whole lot to talk about. It was okay. There was nothing to write home about. Nothing was amazing or anything. I think it was just okay. And so I hope they step it up, because if this is the tone they set moving forward for this doesn't seem like it's going to come close to the early seasons of Game of Thrones.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
What do you remember from the first episode of Game of Thrones?
I remember being enthralled.
Enthralled?
Yeah.
When was the last time you watched it?
I don't know. Probably before the premiere of season 8, so 2019.
Okay. I
watched it with you.
If you look at that episode and you look at this episode, you'll find a lot of similarities. A lot of similarities.
I just remember liking the characters and being intrigued to see where it went, and I don't feel that way. I am intrigued. My second question
is, when you watched Game of Thrones, the first episode, did you watch it when it first premiered, one episode, or did you watch were you able to watch more than one episode in a row?
Oh, I don't know. I was with you. I guess we were able to watch
more than one episode in a row.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
That makes a huge difference. And for you, like, do you understand what I'm saying? It makes kind of a huge difference.
Clown music makes an excellent point. Bran gets thrown out of the window in the first episode.
Yeah, Bran gets thrown out. That was the only
shit.
That was like a big thing at the end. You're right. There was a hook, and maybe that is what is missing.
That's a huge hook. There is nothing from that.
Maybe that is what is missing in the first episode of this, that there wasn't a hook. And Dan has a really good point on that. But I think a lot of the stuff about it being a setup is the first episode of Game of Thrones is a huge setup.
And I acknowledge
you understand
that.
What I'm saying?
I think
you're right. It's missing that hook.
I recognize that. I just think I just think it's a challenge with the characters they picked. There's no one that's very lively in this show. You had Robert Baratheon coming in the first episode and going, "You go fat," and then they have a nice big laugh, a nice moment together, and there's love, and I don't feel any of that. Maybe between Rhaenyra and like her friend, her handmaiden. I'm not really sure. So
I mean, I hate to say it. The thing is like they put. I mean, they put this whole first episode on the shoulders of Matt Smith, who's the most charismatic person out of the whole entire show that they have, and the most well-known person they have on the show.
But even then, you're like, not really rooting for him.
It's not fair to him, and in a way, it all rested on him being the most the one who stole the scene, because he is the most well-known and the most quote unquote like the top girl on that. So that's the thing. And you have to remember, like, I don't know, I think we expected like Sean Bean to be like the veteran, but Sean Bean's character was not the person who was supposed to steal the scene. Do you know what I'm saying? And
he did for me. I mean, he was very good.
He was good. He was very good in the original.
But when he's put up against like a Robert Baratheon, who's like so much more charismatic, he is the more toned down character, right? He is like in this. If you want to compare Game of Thrones, because obviously we're gonna do that. Like his character is the Viserys character in the new version.
It's not comparable.
It's hard to compare them because they're two different families that you're getting to know. Like the Targaryens aren't known for being like the lively, fun, happy bunch. That's
not true. They have their whole wide gamut of people.
They've got like a dark history to them.
I get that, but you need to have people you want to root for and people you want to root against. We have, in my opinion, one person to really root for. And Ray, we got to figure out how to say her name, the princess, Rhaenyra? and Matt Smith's kind of a middling area right now. Like I think he's just kind of like the wild card, and they're not handling his character the way I thought they were going to, and I'm very intrigued. But like we don't have many people to root against right now, and I'm just kind of like, and I guess that's maybe to be revealed. But I really don't feel strongly about any protagonist or antagonist in the story. And that makes me just kind of feel like, okay, here we go, I guess. I don't know.
I kind of like that better because then it lets you choose characters that you like. Like in the first episode, like I don't need clear cut. I want to get to know the person, the character. Whether they're good or bad, I'll determine for myself of how I feel about them. Like I don't need everything spelled out for me. I don't think that audiences these days need like this is the bad guy. Like they're more intelligent than that, especially coming off of Game of Thrones fans. Like you don't necessarily have to have the line being drawn in the sand to be like you either stand here or you don't.
I'm not saying a line drawn in the sand.
It's very difficult to not draw a line in the sand when you throw a child out the window. Okay, so like that that much is thing. But like I will say, like my feeling about Rhaenyra, if you want to say it's like you're whether you like her or rooting for her, you're like tepid, right? At best, right? Tepid. You're not excited. You're like room temperature at best.
I'm more than tepid for her. I'm just saying she's the only one. My point
is I feel strongly about her as I feel about like Daenerys Targaryen in that first episode because I didn't like whatever. All right.
That's fair. That's fair. But
I'm as about
there's no one
enthusiastic
else
about her as I am about Danny in that first episode. Maybe
I don't
a little
give
more.
two
At least
shits
she's got
about
a dragon
anyone
that she's
else.
riding around already.
That's cool. More dragons. Yeah, let's appease the people. More dragons. Fine. Right. I don't care about that. I just want more, like, I want to feel something for any of these characters, and I don't feel anything for most of them. And
I can understand
that's not
that.
A show is supposed to elicit like a reaction and a feeling, and I don't feel much. And I again recognize that's based on previous and my standards are probably kind of high. My guard is up. But even that being said, I still don't feel like I care about anyone really besides her. And you cared about multiple people in the first episode of Game of Thrones, and you really also strongly
Bran, you like Jon.
Yeah, you rooted against multiple people as well.
You kind of like Tyrion. Like you didn't know what to think of him, but you already saw this guy who was kind of stealing the scene in every single scene he was in. Like Tyrion was such a great character already. You already had somebody who you kind of root for, and even within like the bad family, you already had some. It's like the thing is, it's so hard to get. Like it's so hard, and it's not like. You're right, Smarch. It's missing the hook that Game of Thrones had. Game of Thrones, that first episode and that first season was a very, very special recipe, And I hate to say it, and then while you were talking about how you were like how you felt about Game of Thrones and how it like destroyed you, especially towards the end, is Game of Thrones became essentially its downfall was its own success. Once it became so incredibly successful and so many people depended upon it to become successful, way more people had their hand in the pie trying to figure out how to make it quote unquote successful. And in the end, it was just too much for everybody, from the top down.
Good point.
The level of quality that they were trying to do and all the stuff and all the stress they put on themselves to be what it was and to continue being successful was ultimately its own downfall. You could see it from the top down, from coffee cups left on scenes and then never being picked up during the editing process. They're like, that's a failure from the top down, right? Like when you work in some professions, like when there's issues like that, that's a clear problem from the top down. From the very bottom person who was supposed to first pick that out when it was being filmed, to the editor, to all the way up to the director who saw the final cut, all that stuff is a top down, up, down, all their problems of their success. And that's the problem right now that they had, right? And coming into this, they chose to shake it up. They brought in different people to try to make sure that they didn't have those problems. People who are quote unquote more hungry. But unfortunately, despite the fact that they did bring in more people, that also meant they gave the upper echelon more oversight into these new people who hadn't done this before, and therefore like you could see this first episode had a lot of like disjointedness because like everyone's like, I feel like there's just a lot of people trying to get in and saying like we need to do this and that, and they're trying to please so many things, and in the end they don't end up pleasing anybody. Like they don't end up hooking anyone. Do you know what I'm saying? They're like, yeah, we want more dragons. Yeah. Okay, somebody, the dudes up there said like we need more dragons, so let's get the CGI guys up there to do some different looking dragons, blah blah blah. And how much, like it's just there, you could already tell they're being pulled from like 1,000 fucking directions. All right, I mean, right? Like
to that point, I feel like they kind of said something to us as well. Now that I think about it, that like they're like, look, this isn't that. Like we're not. George is right. The bar for Game of Thrones before that last season was like the moon. I mean, you can't get much further than how much people loved that show. Just overall, the hype was real for that show. Like that was like, what are you doing Sunday? Everyone with a collective voice watching Game of Thrones. Whether you loved it or not, that's what happened every Sunday night when it was on air. So this show has that weight on its shoulders, and I think they were like, look, we're not that. We're going to give you a different show. And I think they're setting themselves with a lower bar is the safest thing for them to do, because if they're like, let's come off the gate fucking running and then you're going to get all hyped and everyone's going to be like, yes, and then 4 episodes in, you're going to be like, what the fuck is happening? But if they at least keep an even keel and keep you kind of intrigued with what's going to happen and give you good character development over the course of these 10 episodes, then I think they'll have a if not commercially, then at least from financial standpoint, they'll have a success where it's not a complete failure, but it's a good show. It's got good characters. It's got something that people can watch, and they're not going to like build a fucking religion out of, which is what happened essentially with some of the Game of Thrones.
The problem without the hook is that it's a pacing issue, I think, for the audiences. The
Agreed.
problem without the hook is a pacing issue.
Completely.
Like, if you don't have a hook in that first episode, you don't know what the pace of this season and the series is. And not having a hook is a problem. Like, the way I see it is Game of Thrones is a chess game, right? It's a chessboard. It's a big chessboard.
It's a long game.
It's a long game, right? We all understand it's going to be a long game. Especially after seeing 8-9 seasons of whatever in Game of Thrones. We understand it's going to be a long game. By that first hour of Game of Thrones, we expected more than one person to move a pawn. But that's so far all that's happened is there's been one move and somebody moved a pawn. Like, right, Dan? Yeah. Like, that's all that's happened.
If at all.
If at all. Pretty sure it's just, they've spent an hour thinking about their first move, and then somebody finally moved a pawn, if anything, right? Like, and you're like, man, do I want to sit through this chess game and watch this?
He moved a pawn. He moved a pawn at the end. He moved a pawn
at the end, but he used his full hour.
All right, if I'm being generous, he's leaving his hand on the pawn and has not released his hold of it. Yeah, is where I feel. And
I think he released it with the scene where it's like showing the fealty to the new heir.
That's like when you go to Six Flags and you wait like for a 1 hour ride for a 1 hour line, and then suddenly for some reason it turns into a 3 hour line, and you've barely moved at all in those first half hour, and you're like, and then like, is this like Dan's like, I want to get out of line. Like, I've been there with Dan in real life, and Dan's like, maybe we should just leave, like, because this 1 hour line turned into a 3 hour line. I don't want to talk about
Six Flags, but like, but yeah, I feel a lot. I don't even think, I think with season 7 of Game of Thrones, I don't think the expectations were very high. They were coasting it through season 7, and I was still okay with it. And that's all they needed to do. And I get that they've established this is not Game of Thrones. And I like that about it, but that's impossible. That is impossible at this point to do, because this show could be middle of the road for the rest of its tenure, and people will still tune in every week no matter what. Like, and that bothers me.
The luckiest thing for them in the world.
I know. I don't, just because the last show was good doesn't mean you can just like fucking, sit it on cruise and be. Anyway,
this show is like, if you're somebody who enjoys Game of Thrones beyond the TV series, and you enjoy like the whole like reading the books and the whole lore of it, and like you love doing all that, this show first episode has done a pretty good like setup, and has satisfied, I think, like the Game of Thrones like uber nerd who's like, oh man, I got to see like all these characters that I've read about before. Like they showed a lot of interesting characters, a lot of characters who are like, from someone who like knows how this is the problem with Game of Thrones, right? Is that like a lot of people kind of know where the direction is because there's been books, there's been story. One of the things I talked in my first stream back after Game of Thrones aired, the title of the stream was like, did Joffrey already spoil the story of House of the Dragons? And he does, and I'm gonna point that out. In that second season, when Joffrey takes what's her name? Takes
Sansa?
Not Sansa. What is her name?
Marjorie Tyrell?
Yeah, Marjorie Tyrell. When she takes Natalie Dormer. I was thinking Natalie Dormer, but when she was taking Natalie Dormer into like Marjorie Tyrell into the Sept, she points to Rhaenyra's crypt. And she's like, that's Rhaenyra Targaryen. Like, her brother's dragon ate her while her son watched. That is this girl. Like, we know how this whole story ends. We know how this whole story ends, and that's a big problem with a prequel. That every single prequel has
about
to deal
every
with.
prequel.
So how can you possibly be invested? It's like, how does this go from that? Like, it's a very tough thing to bridge. Is my point. Like, there's a lot of problems with being.
I didn't know that either, and I'm a little salty that I know that now. I'm not gonna lie.
But wish you hadn't said that, but that's okay.
But that being said, that how often, like you could say that about history in our world, how often is history proven true in the Game of Thrones? And the answer is not always. So maybe that's not what happens exactly.
I will tell you what you said was missing was like the quote unquote the hook, right? You wanted me to tell you what they thought their hook was? Like the producers were like, we need a hook, right? Like everybody knows they need a hook. It's the first episode, right? So the producers were like, we need a hook, write in a hook. Do you know what the show thought their hook was?
The prophecy?
Yeah, the prophecy was the hook. Like which is like, what are you telling me? The whole point of Game of Thrones is the hook to this show? Like, dude, it's a very hard. Yeah, it's a very hard.
I want to tell you guys. I was starting to get into it right up until that moment, and I immediately like. So this is leading to This is again leading to not only what we might know the ending is of this show. This is leading to the universally panned ending of Game of Thrones. So why should I care? But Tim had a good point. I'm going to let him go.
My point was, if I recall, and I am not the leading expert of all things Game of Thrones. I watched most of them once because it's fucking convoluted. But why is there only one winter? Like, who's to say that there isn't a winter before this? There was a winter. They mentioned in Game of Thrones that there was a winter in the past. We are 172 years prior to Game of Thrones.
You're telling me
there's not another great winter? So they say that the prophecy is leading up to a great winter where they all need to come together. Who's to say that didn't happen before, once before Game of Thrones? So again, they're going to give you the same. Hopefully they don't, but maybe they give you the same concept of Game of Thrones, but it's in this era and not
I sincerely
that Game
hope
of Thrones.
So.
Because then it's a whole different thing. They can right the wrongs that they did at the end of this is their time to retcon. Is if they're like, look, let's give them a second winter, and instead of just having the fucking army get it, let's all remember that fight scene. It was awful. I hated that episode where they were like, oh, the zombie army is attacking, and it was pitch black and you couldn't fucking see anything, and then you get this big thing, you're like, oh, you're gonna have this really cool fight scene between Maisie Williams and the fucking what do they call him, the White King? Night King, and you're like, yeah. Oh, she just caught the sword and stabbed him, and it's over. That for me was I was like, all right, well, I don't give a fuck about the rest of anything because that was why I was here. So they can retcon that by being like, oh, look, here's what a winter battle looks like against the forces of evil, against the supernatural things that are in this world. Because for me, opening with a shot of the dragon, and hopefully there's more stuff like that. Look, yeah, you're probably right, but
I'm not probably right. I mean, that's not what.
If I'm writing the show, this is what
I understand why you would want to do that, but that's not what they're doing. Obviously, the concept of the show has nothing to do with ever. I would be so surprised if they ranged past the trident in the show, meaning that's how far north they go. They don't go. I would be so surprised if they even make close to Winterfell by 1,000 leagues.
You for half a second met a Stark who clearly
it's very unlikely they range north, because from what we know, they've never traveled north. Southern armies don't go north. That's
we don't. Who knows? Maybe they'll just be fuck it all. George R. Martin didn't write these books. We're gonna write them. So who knows?
I feel like a lot of it is you're right. Dan is totally right. I hate this. As much as I would like to enjoy the show without shaded glasses, I can't go into it without it. And he's totally right. This show, the first episode really did miss the mark on a lot of things. It really did. I understand what it is, and I understand it is what it is, and I'm willing to accept that. And because, quote unquote, it is Game of Thrones, I'm willing to give it another chance. It did miss the mark on a lot of things. It lacked that hook that you really, really needed, and it just He's right, and what sums it up perfectly?
On the shock value.
The feel of this whole entire episode sums it up perfectly with this beautiful title I saw online, which is House of the Dragon Sexy, and kicks off with Matt Smith as the saddest guy at an orgy. I fucking feel like it's Matt Smith, because that's really this is it's a metaphor for what this show kind of feels like. You're it's exciting. I'm at an orgy. Well, there's a lot of cool things to look at. But I'm still kind of disappointed, and I'm Matt Smith sitting here You know, like I feel you, Dan. I'm gonna like lean more towards you. Usually, I'm the realist in the middle. I'm gonna lean a little more towards Dan today on this because I think he's convinced me of that. Like I totally know where you're coming from. I really do. I can sympathize.
I don't want to be right. I want to like it. I didn't. It's one episode, and I'm not gonna stop.
Look, I will give it another. I will give it more
they've
time.
got time.
You're right.
So, and just because they chose not to go with a hook doesn't mean they can't build on what they've set. I really hope that this prophecy they talk about is not the one that we see play out in Game of Thrones. I really do hope Tim is right and it's its own thing. They have the chance to right their wrongs. They, I hope they step it up. We'll see.
Ultimately, I think we can speculate and talk about this with we are all looking through some form of jaded glasses, but ultimately I think it is a little too early to give a final verdict on the show if it's going to be good or bad or not.
I'm gonna try watching, of course.
Tune in. We're going to try and get these to you like the night after, so look for more Game of Thrones stuff on Mondays.
I liked it. I actually did. I will say I did like it.
Monday. Yeah, I had a good time
keep watching.
watching
I liked it enough to keep
I will
watching.
say, if you haven't seen this episode, watch it. See for yourself if you like it or not.
Comment.
Going into it, there is a trigger warning. I feel I must mention this. It's the end of the episode, but I feel like they did try and hook you with like a shock moment. You know how like there's always some sort of brutality or crazy moment, and in this one it was not great. I don't feel that this needed to be done, where they had like a camera in the room during the world's first C-section, which was not needed at all.
That was intense.
And it was really intense of a scene. Even I'm sitting there like, ooh, like that's like, but it sets up a character, and I get it. You could have just set up the scene and then cut away and then come back and be like, oh, she didn't make it. Cool.
Yeah.
Like we get it. But I did not need to watch
enjoy that.
most of that. No,
that was rough.
No. But I wanted to say that as a warning to anybody who it's been on the internet, people have talked about it, but if you want to go watch it, just know going into that there is something that happens in that regard, and it will be hard for some people to watch. But I to their credit, I guess it set up a scene, set up a character a little bit more to see where his priorities lied.
Yeah.
So it was just really intense in, I guess, in true Game of Thrones fashion. It was very intense. So watch it. Let us know what you think in the comments. We love to hear from you as always. Look for more of these. We'll be doing these. We're also going to be doing some other stuff as well, as far as other content. We're going to have other reviews coming along, and who knows, maybe we'll actually eventually do a core episode. Who knows? And then keep an eye out for the new Versus series that's dropping, interviews from people in different nerd industries, games, all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, we've been The Modern Nerd, and thank you for watching.